I've ever seen in my life. $3. Yes, 3. At that price, I'm pretty sure the seller just wanted it gone before the recycling center charged them a fee. When I cracked it open, I was honestly surprised it wasn't already part of an e-waste sculpture somewhere. I have absolutely no idea what's inside, and I have even less idea whether this $3 Survivor can somehow be transformed into a real gaming machine. So let's fire it up, dig into the mystery hardware, and see if we can perform a miracle in today's video. Based on the outside, this looks like a regular Acer desktop, but something's definitely wrong. The entire power supply is missing. Probably died, exploded, or someone just decided it wasn't worth saving. The front DVD drive? Gone too. It must have left together with the PSU. So I opened it up, hoping maybe, just maybe, there'd be an i9 and a GTX 1080 Ti hiding inside. And nope, everything has been stripped clean. No RAM, no hard drive, nothing. So my $3 basically bought me a motherboard and maybe a CPU. Alright, let me pull the CPU out and see which S9 I just scored. Oh no, it's gone. Someone already took it. My $3 dream just died right here. So in the end, all I've got is a case and a motherboard that feels just as empty as my soul right now. In the end, the only thing I could actually befriend was the motherboard itself. A quick glance told me everything I needed to know. This is a B85 board with an LGA 1150 socket, which means it can only run Intel 4th Gen CPUs. But before getting too excited, I had to figure out one thing. Does it even work? So I grabbed one of my own CPUs, dropped it into the socket, installed an 8GB RAM stick, and that's when the next tragedy hit. This motherboard uses a 12-pin power connector, something no normal power supply in my room, and we're probably on the planet, still uses. Every PSU I own only has standard 24-pin connectors. So yeah, I had no choice. I had to buy a 24-pin to 12-pin adapter for $7.20 just to bring this mystery board back to life. And now comes the moment of truth. Time to find out whether this motherboard actually works, or if it's just another piece of e-waste that somehow found its way into my hands. I hit the power button. The CPU fan spins up, which gave me a tiny bit of hope, but the keyboard stayed dark, and there was no display output at all. My first suspicion was the RAM. Maybe the contacts were dirty. So I pulled the stick out, cleaned the pins, swapped it to the other slot, but nope, nothing changed. At this point, I was getting pretty worried that the motherboard itself might be dead. I removed the cooler and touched the CPU to check, and yep, it was warming up normally. So at least the CPU isn't the culprit, which unfortunately means the problem is probably somewhere on the board. And after messing around for way too long, I finally woke it up. Turns out the problem wasn't the RAM, the CPU, or even the motherboard. It was something embarrassingly simple that I completely forgot about. The safety switch. This little switch is designed to detect whether the case is properly closed. If the side panel isn't on, the system literally refuses to boot. It's a built-in safety feature, meant to protect the components from outside interference and to protect the user in case something inside the PC short circuits. Honestly, pretty clever. Alright, so the motherboard is finally alive again, but getting it usable is a whole different problem. If I were to use an external ATX power supply, there's no clean way to fit it inside the case. Leaving it outside technically works, but aesthetically? Yeah, absolutely not. I'm not doing that. So I started digging through my stash of old SFF cases, hoping to find something that could save the day. And luckily, I found a power supply that looks 99% identical to the original one that came with this Acer case. It even lines up perfectly with the mounting holes, like it was meant to be there. The only issue? The motherboard expects a 12-pin connector, while this PSU only has a standard 24-pin. But that's fine, because I already bought a 24-pin to 12-pin adapter earlier. So yeah, power supply problem solved. Next up is the CPU. I ordered an i5-4670, and believe it or not, it only cost me $9 a sound. A pulled chip taken from an old office PC somewhere. In the LGA 1150 lineup, this isn't the strongest processor you can get, but it has exactly what I need. A turbo boost up to 3.8 gigahertz, 4 cores and 4 threads, and a TDP of just 84 watts. That power draw is perfect for my tiny 220 watt power supply, and of course I'm still planning ahead so I can throw in a dedicated GPU later. For for $9, this little CPU is honestly a pretty solid win. For the RAM, I decided to give this little machine a proper upgrade. I'm going with two 8GB sticks for a total of 16 gigabytes. Now we get to the GPU, and honestly, this part took the most effort. The space inside this tiny Acer case is ridiculously cramped, so fitting a full-size graphics card was basically impossible. And I really didn't want to repeat what I did last time, cutting the case open like a maniac. Sure, it worked, but it wasn't exactly the most stable or elegant solution. So my goal this time was clear: keep the original size, no cutting, no bending metal, and still fit a real GPU inside. The only way to do that was to sacrifice the DVD drive bay because, let's be honest, nobody in 2025 is using DVDs anymore. That empty space is basically prime real estate for a GPU. For the graphics card, I went with a GTX 1050 Ti, 4GB. It's not high-end by any means, but it's perfect for this build. It only draws 75 watts, it doesn't require any external power connector, and it pairs nicely with the tiny 220-watt power supply I'm working with. To connect the GPU to the PCIe slot, I quickly realized there was no riser cable that could reach far enough or bend into the awkward position I needed. And the ones that might work cost around $50, and basically 20 times more expensive than the entire PC we're rebuilding here. Yeah, not happening. But today I've got a much cheaper solution, only about $7. It's a PCIe 3.0 X1 to X16 riser cable. Of course, it comes with some limitations since it only uses one PCIe lane to communicate with the system. But don't worry, later on I'm going to compare the performance of one lane versus 16 lanes to see how big the difference actually is. But the moment I actually got the adapter in my hands, reality hit me. This thing requires a 6-pin power connector, and of course, the OEM power supply in this Acer doesn't have one. Not a single 6-pin anywhere. So yeah, I had to spend more money again, and buy a SATA to 6-pin power adapter, which cost me another $7.30. At this point, the accessories are getting more expensive than the entire PC itself. Now for the final step, fixing the GPU firmly into place. I had to mark and drill 2 holes into the chassis, then remove the GPU's I/O bracket, and yes, use some gentle persuasion with a hammer to straighten it out so I could actually secure it with screws. After exhausting every trick I had, the mini gaming PC finally came together, and honestly, I'm proud of the result. The GPU sits perfectly inside the case, way more solid than before, and I can even close the side panel like a normal PC. Well, almost normal. If I close it completely, it blocks the display output, so technically I'd have to cut a small hole in the case for the cable. But you know what? That's unnecessary for now. Let's jump straight into the performance tests and see what this Franken PC can really do. Starting with Minecraft at full HD in 8 chunks, the performance honestly surprised me. Even through a PCIe X1 connection, the FPS stayed above 200, with an average of around 100 frames per second. But once I switched to PCIe X16, with all 16 lanes, the difference was crystal clear. FPS jumped past 300, sometimes even hitting over 400, with an average around 170. A massive gain. Moving on to GTA 5 at full HD on very high settings. While cruising around the city, the system pushed about 25 FPS with an average around 36. Playable, but definitely struggling. However, on PCIe X16, the boost was huge. Almost double the frame rate, making the game way smoother. Next up is one of the toughest games in this test, CS2 at full HD on low settings. Through the X1 adapter, FPS hovered around 90 with averages above 60, more than enough for a fast-paced shooter. Switching to PCIe X16 only improved things slightly with maybe a 5 FPS gain on average. So for CS2, the lane difference doesn't matter too much. And finally, Fortnite at 720p. On PCIe X1, the real-time and average FPS were only around 30, and the constant stutters made the game feel unstable. But on PCIe X16, the FPS instantly jumped by about 30 frames, with the average increasing by around 20. A night and day improvement. So in the end, from a $3 PC shell with only a motherboard left, plus about $80 worth of parts, I managed to bring this junkyard rescue back to life and turn it into a machine that can actually play lighter games pretty decently. Thanks so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the build,